It's funny how love can be both the most beautiful and the most painful thing in the world. I remember the first time I saw him, Jeffrey, standing under the soft glow of the street lamp, his tall frame against the night sky. He was wearing a crisp white shirt, sleeves rolled up to his elbows, dark jeans that hugged his frame just right. His eyes, those deep brown eyes, looked at me like he already knew everything about me, as if we had always been connected. And I, dressed in a simple but elegant midnight blue dress, the fabric flowing softly around my legs as I walked, could feel the pull of him in my chest. I never believed in love at first sight until that moment, standing there in the glow of the evening, feeling his gaze like a touch against my skin. But what happens when that love, so pure and full of promise, is torn apart? We fell in love quickly. Too quickly, perhaps. His smile, his laugh, the way he would gently brush my hair from my face, as if I was the most precious thing in the world, all made me believe in a future I had always dreamed of. A future where we built something beautiful together. He with his soft, fair skin and perfectly messy black hair, and me, a woman of strength and beauty, so proud of the heritage I carried. I loved the way he would look at me when I would tell him about my childhood, the way his fingers would lightly trace the outline of my hand when we sat together, as though he were memorizing the shape of me. I too would memorize him. The little freckles that dotted his face, the warmth of his touch, the way his eyes seemed to hold so many untold stories. It was like we spoke a language that only we understood. But then, as all stories of love seemed to go, things began to change. It was subtle at first, almost like a whisper I didn't want to acknowledge. He became distant, withdrawn. The man who had once looked at me with such tenderness now seemed lost in his own world. We argued, we cried, we held on to each other and let go in the same breath. The truth, the harsh truth, was that Jeffrey had been hiding something from me. There was someone else, someone who could give him what I could not. In the end, it wasn't my love that he needed, but something that I couldn't provide. The day he left, he wore the same white shirt, the one he'd worn when I first met him. But now it looked like a ghost of the man he once was. His brown eyes, once so warm and filled with affection, were now cold, distant. He told me he had to go, that he couldn't be with me anymore. I begged him to stay, but he just walked away. The pain. And just like that, I was left standing in the middle of a dream that had crumbled to dust. The world around me became numb. His absence was an ache I couldn't escape, a wound that wouldn't heal. My heart felt as if it had been torn in two. I wore black for weeks, a constant reminder of the loss that weighed heavy on my soul. I couldn't bring myself to take off the ring he gave me, even though it felt like a chain rather than a promise. It was in those moments, alone in the silence of my apartment, that I realized that sometimes love is not enough. No matter how deeply you care, no matter how much you sacrifice, it may never be enough to keep the ones we love from walking away. The days turned into weeks, and the weeks blurred into months. The ache in my chest became a constant companion, reminding me of the love I had lost. I couldn't sleep without thinking of him. Every pillow I hugged at night felt like a memory I couldn't erase. The warmth of his touch, the way he'd whisper my name in the quiet hours, those moments were like ghosts, flickering through my mind, haunting me. I couldn't move on. How could I? Jeffrey had been my everything. He had been the reason I woke up every day, the reason my heart had been so full of hope. And now, without him, I was nothing. Just an empty shell of the woman I once was. I remember the first time I tried to smile after he left. It was a faint attempt, a mask I tried to wear for the world, but it felt so foreign on my face. People would look at me, and I'd hear them say, "Jane, you're so strong." But they didn't see the truth. They didn't see the tears I cried when I thought no one was watching. I went to the places we used to go. The coffee shop where he'd always order a caramel latte. The park bench by the lake where we'd talk for hours, lost in each other's words. I would sit there alone, watching couples walk by, each holding hands, laughing, smiling. It was a reminder of everything I no longer had. The world had moved on. People went on with their lives, but I stayed stuck in that moment, the moment he walked away from me. It felt like the air had become thicker, harder to breathe, as if the very world was suffocating me. I tried to move forward, to distract myself, but everything seemed to remind me of him. His favorite song would play on the radio, and it would feel like a dagger in my chest. I would see his face in the crowd, only to realize it wasn't him. I would smell his cologne in the air, and for a fleeting moment, My heart would skip a beat before the crushing reality hit that it was just the memory of him. Some nights, I would curl up on the floor, my body shaking with sobs, unable to stop. The tears seemed endless, pouring from me as though the pain was washing me away. I'd cry out his name, hoping that somehow, in some impossible way, he would hear me and come back. But the silence was deafening. He was gone. And then, one fateful evening, I saw him again. I was walking through the city, lost in my thoughts, when I saw him standing by the street corner. My heart skipped, and I felt the air leave my lungs. It wasn't just the sight of him. It was the way he looked at me. There was a flicker of recognition in his eyes, a sadness, a yearning. He was standing there looking so different, more worn, as if life had taken a toll on him, just as it had on me. I froze, my feet rooted to the ground. My hands trembled, and I could barely breathe. My mind screamed at me to turn away, to walk in the opposite direction, but my heart betrayed me. It begged for him, for the man I loved, even though I knew it would only bring more pain. He took a step toward me, his voice so soft, so broken. Jane. Hearing his voice after all this time felt like a lifeline thrown to a drowning woman. But then the truth hit me. He was still with her. The woman who had replaced me. The one who had taken his heart. And there I stood, a shell of the woman I used to be, staring at the man I still loved, knowing that he no longer belonged to me. "I'm so sorry," he whispered, his eyes filled with regret. "I never meant to hurt you." His voice cracked, but I could see the words were meaningless. The damage had been done. He had chosen her, and I had lost him forever. I turned away from him then, my heart breaking with each step. I didn't look back. If I had, I would have fallen apart. It was over. And no matter how much I still loved him, I knew that I had to let go. The love we shared was a beautiful, painful memory that I would carry with me for the rest of my life. But it wasn't enough to save us. And so I walked away, a part of me dying with every step I took. He would never be mine again, and that was the truth I had to face. Days turned into months, and the weight of each passing moment felt heavier than the last. It wasn't that I had stopped loving Jeffrey. It was that I was now faced with the cruel truth. Love was no longer enough. There was no part of me that could escape the fact that he had chosen to walk away. The pain of that decision would linger in every corner of my soul, making it impossible to move forward. I tried to convince myself that I was okay. I told myself that I would eventually heal. I tried to fill the silence of my apartment with noise, but it didn't work. The echoes of his laughter, the warmth of his touch, all seemed to haunt the empty rooms of my life. The memories were too much to bear, and yet they were all I had left of him. There were moments when the guilt would creep in, as if I had somehow been responsible for the end of our love. I replayed every argument, every moment where I could have been different, more patient, more understanding. But deep down, I knew that it wasn't my fault. Jeffrey had made his choice. He had chosen to walk away, and no amount of self-blame would change that. But that didn't stop the guilt from eating away at me, making me question if I had done something wrong. The truth was, I was terrified. Terrified that I wasn't enough for him. Terrified that somehow I had failed him. And then one day, I came to a realization. It wasn't about me anymore. It wasn't about the love we had shared or the life we had built together. It was about the fact that sometimes love simply isn't enough. People grow apart. Circumstances change. And no matter how much you want something to work, sometimes you have to let go. I had spent so much time trying to fix something that was already broken. I had spent so much energy chasing after a love that was no longer mine, when all along, I needed to learn how to love myself again. I needed to accept that I wasn't broken, even though I felt like I was. That I was still worthy of love, even if it wasn't Jeffrey's love. It wasn't easy. The pain didn't magically disappear. But slowly I started to heal. The tears didn't come as often, though they still came. The hollow feeling in my chest lessened, but it never fully went away. Because no matter what, Jeffrey would always be a part of me. A part of my story, a chapter one would never forget. One last time, I went to the lake. The place where we had shared so many of our best moments, where we had promised each other forever. The water was still, a mirror to the sky, and I could almost hear his voice in the wind. For a moment, I closed my eyes and allowed myself to remember. Just remember, the love we once had. And then, with the wind brushing against my face, I whispered my final goodbye. "Goodbye, Jeffrey," I whispered through my tears. You will always be in my heart, but I have to let you go. As the sun began to set, casting a golden glow over the water, I felt something inside me shift. It wasn't the end of my love for him, but it was the beginning of my own healing. I would carry the memory of Jeffrey with me, but I would no longer be trapped in the past. I would walk forward, knowing that the love we shared had shaped who I was, but it would not define me. And with that, I took a deep breath, standing tall for the first time in years. The tears still flowed, but this time they were different. They weren't just tears of pain. They were tears of release.